Hey guys, I'm Eugene Bach with Back to Jerusalem, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China this time. And I just want to take a few minutes to share with you something that I was doing last week. And as I've been traveling around and doing a lot of our projects, overseeing our projects with Back to Jerusalem, I just wanted to stop and do a really quick podcast. For those of you that have been following us for a while, you'll know that all of the podcasts that I do with this old mobile phone that I'm traveling with. I make our AV team just crazy because I don't use any special mics. I don't have like a GoPro or any special camera. I just use my mobile phone and do very simple messages. And I know that they're a little bit GarageBand and they're not very fancy, but hopefully they get the message out there. And it allows us to share exactly what is happening on the field in real time as it's happening. And we can share it with you guys, our prayer partners all around the world. And one of the things that I saw in the last week was a very special young lady, who is the daughter of a brother that I have known for a while now. And she is now applying to receive the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund for her to go to school. And when I sat down with her, my heart was moved, and I have to share this with you. For those of you that have been praying for Back to Jerusalem for some time, maybe some of you have even been supporters of the B2J Martyrs Scholarship Fund. The B2J Martyrs Scholarship Fund I started several years ago when I was working together with different pastors from around China. Specifically, it was in China that year, where I noticed that pastors that were on the run, their children sometimes had to suffer the consequences and were left in the lurch of not being able to go to school, get an education. They suffered because of what their parents were going through. And if you're a parent and you're listening to this, you know exactly where I'm coming from when I say it's harder for you to see your children suffer because of the choices that you've made than for you to suffer yourself. For many of the Christians inside of China, it's not easy for them to suffer the persecution of the Chinese government for the decisions of faith that they have made for themselves. But it was even more difficult when they had to watch their children go through the pain and anguish that they had to go through. Even though the children didn't make those decisions for themselves, the children suffered because of the faith of their parents. It's something that, as I've watched, I've been able to relate to. You know, when I have two children and when both of them went to university, I remember the hardship of wondering where the money was going to come from to send them to university. Even before they went to university, when I first moved to China, they went to private schools. And private schools in China for Westerners, it's not cheap. It would have been cheaper for us to live in the West and for them to go to public school for free, or even to a private school would have been cheaper than the private school tuition in China. And they could have gone to the local Chinese school, but the work that we were doing, the place where we were living just didn't allow for that. We were in a remote area that didn't have any Chinese schools at all, but there was a Western school that was close by, started by missionaries. And so I remember the hardship of wondering, where's this funding going to come from? And miraculously, God provided through the channel of his people. And I remember that feeling of the relief, the blessing, the happiness, the joy to the Lord when my children were taken care of. I made the decision to be a missionary. I made the decision to move to China. I made the decision to live in a rural area. At that time, we lived on a small island in the middle of nowhere. I made those decisions, and now my children are going to suffer for the decisions that I've made. But God provided. And my heart was just overjoyed at the provision that he made year after year after year. And there were times where I'm like, okay, my children now have tuition paid for this year, but next year, where's it going to come from? And it was kind of like the manna that God provided to his children in the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, where when the manna came for today, it didn't last for tomorrow. You had to have tomorrow's faith for manna tomorrow. Every day was a renewal of faith and belief that God would provide. In many ways, that's where I found myself. Believing in the Lord that I don't know where it's going to come from tomorrow. I don't know where the manna is going to rain down tomorrow, but I have a belief in my provider that the provision will come when the time is needed. That was a step of faith for me. I didn't like it. I still don't. I wanted to provide and I wanted to plan and I wanted to make sure that it was there so I could identify with the Chinese underground house church members that were on the run, being persecuted by the government and their children suffering because of that persecution. And as I watched the Lord provide year after year after year, now my children are finished with their university. I'm no longer responsible for those tuition costs. And I've been able to watch them grow up under the blessing of having an advanced education. And I thank God for it. And I made a special prayer that God also bless those that I serve with in the way that He blessed me. And that's when I believe God gave me the idea to start what we call the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund. When I started working with pastors and saw that many of their children were not able to attend school because the schools that were free for them in their villages, in their provinces, were not available to the children of persecuted Christians because it was considered that these children were the families of anti-revolutionaries. This was in the earlier days. And so those children were not able to attend those schools. They were hated by the local provincial police. They were hated by the political leaders. They were hated by the political leaders that were also associated with the primary schools and secondary schools. And therefore, the principals and the teachers, it was a trickle-down effect that they also had animosity against the Christians and the believers, and they knew these pastors by name. And they knew their families and their children. And so the children were not able to attend school. You know, I remember in the earlier days, and I've shared this on our podcast before, when the granddaughter of Pastor Jing, if you're not familiar with Pastor Jing became a Christian in China in the early 1910s, and then he started in 1921 the Jesus Family Church. And the Jesus Family Church really is kind of the origin, as we can see it, of the Back to Jerusalem vision. Now, we also have the Back to Jerusalem traveling band in the 1930s and 40s, and then we have other groups that also adopted the Back to Jerusalem vision later on in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. But it was the Jesus Family in 1921 that was started by Pastor Jing that we have the first records of the Back to Jerusalem vision. Even if it wasn't called Back to Jerusalem, their vision was to go back to Jerusalem, preaching the gospel between China and Jerusalem to all of the different nations, going from nation to nation, village to village, and person to person. And I remember being in Liupanshui and meeting with the granddaughter of that founding pastor. And she was quite old at the time. And she spoke to me with tears in her eyes and said, I remember as a little girl that they came and arrested my grandfather and they came and arrested my father. But because I was the child of a anti-revolutionary, because I was the grandchild of the founder of the Jesus Family, and both her grandfather and her father died in prison, she said, I too had to suffer for the choices that they made. She was not allowed to attend school. Her mom was not given a job. Her mom was not given the iron rice bowl, as they say, during those days of provision that came from the Communist Party to the people of China. They were ostracized because of the Christian belief that ran strong in their family. And so she reminded me of a task that we are given as Christians to support not just the persecuted church, but their families. That's where the real hurt, pain, and persecution comes from. It's one thing to be arrested and thrown in prison and tortured for your faith. It's a completely different animal altogether when you see your children suffer because of your faith. Sometimes there are Christians that can endure going through the hardship of being tortured, beaten, even threatened with death. But when you bring their children, that is a hardship that almost no parent can take. I remember there was a woman evangelist that I worked together with. She became an evangelist in Tibet. And when she was arrested for preaching the gospel, they tortured her. They threatened her. They did everything that they possibly could to convince her to give up her faith, recant her belief in Jesus Christ, and to become an atheist as is required by the Chinese Communist Party. And she refused. She valued her faith in Jesus Christ more than her own life. But then they really turned the screws on her. When they brought her out of her solitary confinement cell, they set her down in the visitor area of the prison where she was at in Tibet. And sitting on one side of the bars, she had to watch on the other side as her two children, her young son and daughter, were escorted in by the police, tears in their eyes, and they sat on the other side of that bar in front of their mom. And they pleaded with her, "Mom, please, please deny Jesus. Please come home. Don't you love us, Mom? Don't you love us? Why are you doing this to us? Why are we living without you? Why are we suffering without you? We don't have enough food. We don't have enough money. We're not able to go to school. They're telling us that we're going to grow up to be slaves and prostitutes if you don't come and save us and rescue us. Please, Mom, please." And the mom's heart broke in a way that she didn't know was possible. These are the children that we are working together with to provide an education for when the parents are in prison, when the parents are on the run, when the parents are being persecuted. They have so many more trials to think about, but if we can do anything to help them, I pray that it is to take off a little bit of the burden by giving them an education, by taking care of the children while they are suffering, while they are on the run, so that they can be content in their mind that, okay, I might suffer, but at least my children are taken care of. This is why we started the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund. This Martyrs Scholarship Fund goes directly to pay for not just the education of children that have parents that are being persecuted for the faith, but it also goes to pay for their livelihood, their school, their clothing, their housing. It gives them money for food, it gives money for the caretaker, and it gives money for transportation for them to go back and forth to school. And we try to provide not just a basic education, but a good education with the hopes that the child will not just turn out with a very bare minimum for the requirement to survive in society for the future, but an education that will make them dangerous for the next generation, where they can continue serving the Lord like their parents, but one that has an education behind it where they can become doctors and lawyers and business owners to be able to help other persecuted Christians. Over the years, we've been able to provide an education for many children that have been suffering because of what their parents have had to go through. And we've paid for even all the way up and including medical school for the children of persecuted parents, where we have put several believers through medical school so that they could go out and become doctors afterwards. And one of those doctors that we've actually paid with the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund. We've paid for medical school for one believer that is now serving in a Muslim nation that I can't name because they are working as Chinese in a medical profession in a place where there's not many Chinese working in the medical profession in this Muslim nation. So I can't mention the Muslim nation, but this person is now serving as a medical doctor missionary. The father might have suffered for his faith, but his children were able to get a good education. And so I just came from a training where I was able to meet together with a pastor that I've been working with for many years now. This pastor is the strangest pastor you will ever meet in your entire life, because he comes from a Buddhist family in the midst of the Himalayas, where they are known for being able to fly. They are the flying Buddhas. And he became a believer. And when he became a believer, his entire family, his entire government, his entire village all turned against him. And he's been suffering for his faith ever since then. And we've told stories that we've written about. You can find them in the archives of the Back to Jerusalem website, where we've shared about this flying Buddha that has become a believer, how he has been persecuted for his faith, detained, arrested, tortured, even threatened to lose his citizenship and kicked out of the country because of what he believes. Within the last couple of days, I sat down with him. I was preaching at some meetings in a very remote area. And we had many Buddhists and Hindus that came to this training. And when they did come to the training, he came and he said, I need your help. Here's my daughter. She needs an education. She needs help. Is there anything that Back to Jerusalem can do? Because she can't go to university in my village. She can't go to university in my nation because of who I am. She's also been blacklisted. So now she has to go to a private university, but we don't have the money for that. We don't have the funds for that. She's suffering because of what I have decided, that I would follow Christ. And we prayed together with him, and I sat down with this young girl and we talked about her school and her education, and she applied for the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund in person. And we decided to support her for the year 2025 and the beginning of 2026 for $2,000 to go to a private institution to receive her schooling. Now, everybody that is given to the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund, we're so thankful. If you haven't given to it before, please consider to go online and pray whether this is something that God wants you to be a part of. Because with only $10 a month or $5 a month, or maybe a one-time donation of $10 or more, you can make the difference in a young child's life that would otherwise have to suffer together with their parents. We try to eliminate some of that suffering of the child as well as the burden of the parents. And we would like to invite you to come and be a part of that. Join together with us. Be a part of making a difference in a young child's life. This is the Back to Jerusalem Martyrs Scholarship Fund. You'll find this on our website. You can make a donation there. You can also send a check to our organization and just write in the notes. This is specifically for the B2J Martyr Scholarship Fund. Then we'll make sure that it goes to the right place and it will get to the right child. Thank you so much for your years of support and prayer. And thank you for partnering together with Back to Jerusalem and the Persecuted Church and helping their children get an education and have a better future. Thank you for downloading this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. God bless you.